right, good evening. The Audit and Finance Committee meeting is now called to order. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for, okay, we have October 11th, August 21st, September 12th, and November 28th. Okay, can we get a, thank you. So, aye. Do we have any requests to speak today? Okay, we have the following items up for discussion. Our 2023 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report by CRI, Carr, Riggs, and Ingram.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Sims, Managing Partner of Carr Riggs. And we appreciate the opportunity to be here and to serve the city. With me are my partner, Josh Strahan, and Senior Audit Manager, David Sims. We're going to do a quick presentation of the audit results for the 2023 period. Okay. You've got handouts, I believe.
Yes.
Since the audio visual is not going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the fact of what we delivered to you. We've given you several reports. The big annual comprehensive financial report, which contains our unmodified or clean audit opinion, and it contains the financial statements both on a government-wide basis as well as governmental basis and fiduciary fund statements with the resulting or related notes to the financial statements. We've also given you the single audit report for 2023, and that's where we have audited the federal award programs for the city. There are several that are considered major programs, so those require detailed testing. Again, on those reports, we have an unmodified opinion, no modification or qualification of the opinion. We also render reports dealing with the passenger facility charge reports for 23, reports to governance. That's where we give you information about how the audit was conducted, any kind of concerns that came to our attention, any conversations that need to be reported to you, or any other matters that would otherwise not be reported. This is the vehicle that we have to give it to you. We have no items in there that we need to report to you, and we say that. So that's, again, a good indicator. And finally, we issue several debt compliance letters. One item has non-compliance, as it did in the prior year, and Josh will speak to that. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Josh to speak about the findings from the audit reports.
Good afternoon. In relation to the debt compliance letter, the airport compliance letters were fine. They were in compliance for 2023. For the water and sewer compliance letters, there's two that are issued. One of them is for normal compliance in accordance with the statutes. That one was in compliance. The one that was not in compliant was in relation to the DEQ loans for the coverage. The coverage was not sufficient enough, and that's what kicked it out to be non-compliant. For the audit itself, we had a number of findings that we identified that we've reported to you. The first one is a new finding for this year. It was dealing with budget transfer entries that were made. There was entries that were made in accordance with the laws that y'all put into place, but the actual transfers hadn't occurred yet, and so those needed to be corrected. Second entry was in relation to, or second finding was in relation to the general fund property standards and accounts receivable and the methods of tracking and subsequent collections of those fines and violations. That is a repeat finding from 2022 and prior that has continued. The third one is a listing of material adjusting journal entries that are made. The third one is material adjusting journal entries that are made in the course of the audit. Those are actually presented and listed out in the back of your packet to see what kind of journal entries are made. That is also a repeat finding from prior years as well. The fourth one is compensated absences. in relation to getting the information from the various departments in order to be able to calculate the actual compensated absences. The fifth one is CFA preparation. This is the document that you provide to us that details out your federal awards. That has a lot of sources of information, and so we've had to make material adjustments to that document based on information that's provided during the timing. The sixth finding is a late filing. June 30 is the statutory deadline with Louisiana Legislative Auditor. We filed late. We requested an extension, but since it was not a disaster grant, it falls under noncompliance. The seventh finding is relation to payroll. It's not a material weakness. It is new for the current year. It is dealing with an instance of somebody getting paid while they were also on leave as well. The eighth issue is misappropriation of assets. This is new. It's not a repeat finding. It's dealing with the matter that was investigated by DOJ and FBI and ultimately resolved. Number 9 is dealing with reporting for grants, the SAFER grant specifically. The department did not timely file those reports, and because of that, it causes you to not be able to request funding or get reimbursed for expenditures that you've already incurred. The last finding, I'll go back. The last finding is the one that occurred in the previous year and has ultimately been resolved for this year. It's dealing with the state and local fiscal recovery with the COVID funds. Next slide. Oh, other way. In 2023, we tested 3 major programs. We tested the Federal Transit Cluster, Airport Improvement Program, and then the Home Investment Partnerships Program. As we said, we had no findings related to those. And then there's a comparison here between 2023 and 22. You had 28.6 million reported on your CFO last year compared to 47.4 in the prior year. The decrease, you had substantial decreases in airport, Federal Transit Cluster for Sportran, and then state and local fiscal recovery funding. So that's the majority of that decrease right there. And then I'll hand it off to David to talk about the management letter comments.
Good afternoon. We also issued a management letter that usually is for things of immaterial noncompliance and other matters for improvement in operations or things. We had 6 management letter comments this year. As you can see, all but one of them were repeated findings. The first one, the ethics training. Everybody is supposed to have a 1-hour governmental ethics course that they take during the year, calendar year basis. We had, I think, 19 out of 63 people we looked at that did not have evidence of that training. The second one is on bank reconciliations. We had, again, have had issues with certain things that were either labeled improperly or weren't in the same period. But again, bank reconciliation, we had some material changes that we had to make to, I think, the operating and the payroll bank recs. The number 3, the budget noncompliance. Again, we had 6 funds that were over the 5% over the revenue and expenses for the year. And then we had, I think, 2 that with the actual expenses were over the 5% over the budgeted. And we have made recommendations on all of these, and it seems like there are things that might be done or will be done to hopefully correct that, especially that one. Make budget revisions toward the end of the year once they can see what the current numbers really are. The number 4 was the new one this year, retainage payable schedules. Again, there were not detailed payable schedules that they all could provide us to justify the amount that needed to be recorded at the end of the year on various contracts that were in place. Number 5, the census and data testing. Again, we had Human Resources was tasked to do their census testing and pick a sample on files to make sure that the information was accurate before it went to actuary. And for whatever reason, they never could provide evidence of certain number of files that they tested before that data file was actually sent to the actuary for their procedures. And the last one was pension census testing. Again, there were 7 files that did not have the current documentation in place, and I think 7 missing personnel files that we couldn't locate, or they couldn't locate for us to do our testing of the census.
For all the findings that we did, that we just talked about, all of them are, in our opinion, actionable, and plans have begun to be put into place in order to correct these going forward, some form or fashion between finance and accounting. So just want to point that out. The next slide is just a snapshot of the net position of the government-wide, all your governmental funds, and then your business activities, comparisons between 22 and 23. And you can see the change between the 2 years. The biggest change that occurred in 23 was the Medicaid enrollment for the OPEB plan. That significantly reduced. It had a $200 million decrease in your OPEB liabilities during the year. So that was a huge improvement over the prior year. These are the components of your major items in the government-wide. You can see capital assets and then all your various debt components, whether it's bonds, leases, your pension liabilities, OPEB liability, landfill post-closure costs, compensated absences, and then healthcare claims and litigation. This is your changes between government-wide financial statements. That's on your management's, in the MD&A section of the ACFR, highlighting the changes between years at a summary level. Next slide. And then your revenue changes between years, you can see pretty consistent between periods, between charges, operating grants, capital grants, and then all your tax. Here's your expenses. You had 100 overall between your governmental funds had a $113 million decrease in expenses, and a lot of that is because of the OPEB reduction. And then your business type activities had an approximately $30 million decrease in expenses. This breaks down that activity at a lower level between your major funds, which are the general fund, debt service, your 2 bonds, community development, and then you have a summary of other governmental funds. And then same activity except presented for your enterprise funds, so all your business type activities, airport, water and sewer, solid waste, and convention center and hotel. That's all we have. If you have any questions for us, please at any time let us know. Like I said, the findings that we presented are actionable, and we're in pretty consistent communication with the Department of Accounting and Finance to hopefully get those corrected for the next year.
Question, Butcher?
Yes, thank you. Just for definition purposes, the difference in a material weakness and a significant deficiency, what are the definitions of those?
So any deficiency is a instance of noncompliance or a control failure in your operations. And how it gets rated between a deficiency or a significant deficiency and a material weakness is the likelihood and probability that if something would go wrong, how big the amount or pervasive it could be. Is it something that's going to not prevent or detect a material error or something that is going to happen enough that in volume could become material?
So this significant deficiency in the payroll, explain that just a little bit where everybody knows exactly what happened there.
So on this one, I believe it was an instance where somebody was continuing to be paid over a period of time through normal payroll, but then also was on leave, if I remember correctly.
Were they on leave without pay, or were they on leave with disability? What was going on?
Can't remember the exact. No, that wasn't that. No, that wasn't the SPD one.
So the employee was an SPD, but they were not civil service.
Okay,
And she was on leave.
Okay.
The issue there mainly was communication. The primary issue with that was communication between SPD and the employee and HR. Payroll just processes things as they come to them. Obviously, with an organization as large as the city of Shreveport, payroll is not aware of everything going on in the department, and to be honest, neither is HR. So it's incumbent upon the department to communicate when an employee is out on leave so that their pay can be suspended,
So
or
this-
whatever the case may be.
This employee was a civilian, basically.
Correct.
That had gone on leave and for medical reasons. And if she'd have been civil service, or he would have been civil service, it would have been 364 days of leave.
Correct.
This person didn't qualify for it. So how much dollar amount were we talking about on this one?
Rough estimate right now is around 50,000.
Is that going to be paid back?
Yes.
Okay.
Sheila, the director of finance, is going to reach out to her. I'm still going through the details to make sure we have a correct amount, and then we'll send a letter to her
That's going to be a
to
hard,
make payment arrangements.
for her, I could imagine that that's going to be hard to pay back $50,000. I hope y'all will work with her in some way to make
Yeah,
it clear, but not to make it to where it's difficult for her to live. I wouldn't imagine she's making that much, but I mean, if she was off for that long, that's pretty much her whole salary. So, okay, well, I'm glad that we know exactly what happened with that and where we are with it. But I just wanted to make sure, and I'm assuming that the administration is putting policies in place where this doesn't happen. It sounds like to me, just from talking the other day in our meeting that we had, that there are some real issues with personnel and timekeeping and things like that in both police and fire. And I'd like for us to see some kind of policies put in place, or maybe some kind of computer database that's being used or something, because from what was communicated to myself and Chairman Bowman, it's just kind of like the Wild Wild West over there, and they're doing it antiquated to 15, 20 years ago. And there's got to be something that we can do to keep things like this from happening, because not only is it a disservice to the city, but it's kind of a disservice to the employee that ended up now having to come up with $50,000. So that's all I've got on that. But I have one other quick question, if I could, while I've got you up here. You were talking about noncompliance and the ethics board stuff. 19 out of 63 that y'all sampled. Is this a problem? Because I think all of us have to take our ethics, and we do it. I don't see why employees that are getting paid can't do their. Are we putting something in place, Mr. Dark, to make sure that happens?
The HR director has started sending out, because it's getting to be the end of the year, there'll be this mad dash to do all that, including the person talking to you right now. Make sure you get all that done between now and December 31st.
I think there needs to be some punishment if they don't do the ethics, because that's a state law, and if everybody has to do it, everybody has to do it. And I think that a sampling of just 63 and 19 of them aren't doing it, we can only imagine how many employees we've got citywide they're not doing it. So that's a little bit of a problem to me. That's it. That's all I've got.
Kind of echo what Councilman Butcher was saying. So for me, I'm concerned with repeat findings. I want to make sure we have a plan in place to get those things off. I know some are difficult dealing with the system errors, but I also want to make sure that the recommendation is not just from the firm, that we've talked with administration to make sure that's something that we can reasonably accommodate to get those repeat findings off. And I'm also concerned with the new finding. I want to make sure that we go through those to see what happened there, because, new findings mean that something we didn't happen last year, but it's an issue this year, to make sure that those findings can come off for next year. So I just want to see the administration's response to these findings, and making sure that it's something that's reasonably, that we can actually accommodate and execute for next year.
Councilman, let me just say the one thing that I think I can right now. One of the issues that the CRI folks have pointed out over and over is it takes a much longer time than it should to get correct year-end stuff, and particularly on absences and payroll and stuff like that. So what they've started doing is trying to, in effect, start that process as of November 1st, trying to start testing stuff to see if we can get it to where some of the bugs get out sooner, because one of the biggest delays they have in getting the audit on time is getting accurate data, and the police and fire payroll stuff and the absences stuff seems to be the thing that is the hardest. So we're trying to get ahead of that curve with them. I think the accounting folks in CRI actually they've had a series of meetings. I think they've got another one sometime this week, perhaps, to try to not have that happen again.
Any more questions? Councilman Taylor?
What are misappropriation of assets?
Misappropriation of asset is any misuse or illegal use of asset. That particular finding, if I remember correctly, had to do with 2 police officers
Okay.
that were reporting time that they had not worked under a grant, and they have been
Okay.
prosecuted and convicted at this
I
time.
remember that.
And that was actually the 2022 deal, right? That
Correct.
flowed into.
It was a
2023.
2022 grant that we became aware of in 2023.
I think the problem with that, and this is getting off the subject with me, is that those employees we've got to do something better than keeping them. I know one of them was on leave with pay for almost, 2 years. And we've got to learn to do something better with that, because the crime was, it's a crime, but it didn't amount to any amount of money that we paid this guy to stay on leave while we were investigating it. I think that's more, we're talking probably $150,000 that we paid for them to be on leave while we're investigating it. So I would like for the administration, and I know civil service has our hands tied to a certain extent, but it might not be, a bad idea just to fight it out in civil service. And if you've got that much evidence, which I was told there was that much evidence, but I was on the phone with the police chief at least once every 4 or 5 months. This is prior to this administration, asking why they were still on leave, because I was getting call after call after call. So, I think that the misappropriation of the funds that they were prosecuted for actually was less than us letting them stay on the payroll for almost 2 years. So.
Okay. One of the questions I had, you mentioned that you had some grant findings where the department heads were late on some material for the grants. Can you explain it a little bit more?
So, the departments that operate under grants are police, fire, and community development. And we compile the information to prepare the CFA and submit to them. The problem is that we struggle in getting accurate, complete, relevant information in an untimely manner. We send out every month emails to the department heads and the people who work in those areas as part of our monthly and closing process to submit documentation to us. It continues to be a struggle, and it delays, our audit.
Okay. Have y'all found a resolve for this with Mr. Dark?
So, like I said, we It's part of our month-end closing process. The fund accountant that handles those, she's reviewing it. She's going to go to community development, the department that operates the largest amount of grants, and get with them. I think they probably could use training. There's been some turnover in their areas, and so they probably could utilize some training on how to properly manage those grant programs.
Thank you.
And I have offered and will continue to offer, if they need backup, if they need a department head, kicked in the pants a little to get something done, we'll be more than happy to work. But it's part of what this starting early is about, trying to get in a position where you don't wake up and it's February 28th and you still don't have the stuff, and then it's March, and we had one that was even later than that last year. So we're trying to help them where we can.
So what is the main issue as the result of this audit for the city of Shreveport? What's primary that we should be looking at first?
I mean, I think it all sums up to internal controls in our processes and just documentation and following up.
Any more questions? Okay. Councilman Salvatore?
So if you request, if we have a deadline to produce, and the deadline is not met, and you trace, obviously, the responsibility back to person X, what is the result? Are we, for lack of a better word, what is the punishment for failure to do your job? Other than another email, maybe a phone call, maybe a in-person. I don't know what the solution is. But if you're just failure to do your job, and your job is to produce the data so you can do your job, then what are the repercussions of me or on me to keep ignoring you or can keep ignoring the deadline? Because if we don't do our ethics training, I'm sure that we get chastised heavily for it because it's a requirement. So if this is a requirement, and this is your job for the city, so the city can move forward to function as a responsible entity, where's the punishment there? Or is there?
I think it depends on the
And
department.
I'm sorry to use the
Yeah.
word punishment, but where's the accountability?
Right, yeah, I understand, and I agree there should be consequences. However, what that looks like probably varies by department and within division, I obviously don't have the authority to enact progressive disciplinary action within the departments. I communicate up the chain of command and then go from there. Where I have the ability, the relationship, I do, train and communicate with people on how to get what I need, why it's important, the data should look like, how they can control it. But the results, as you can see from our audit report, vary.
But within each department. But within each department, there's a level that it stops for that responsibility.
Yes.
So in other words, every department has the same person that's responsible for producing the same data or submitting the same reports. Yes or no? I mean, correct? I mean, the job description is the same in each department to produce the data that you require.
As it relates to providing data to
Yeah.
us, yes.
Yeah, so it seems like it would be a disciplinary issue across the board for that position. If all of us are holding the same position, we are required to produce data to you so you can do your job, or so our accountants can do their job, and all of us don't do it, then it seems to be that we could unilaterally develop some kind of disciplinary tickler in my file. I know when I was on the police department, fire department, if you did something wrong, I mean, you got memo after memo and it went in your file, and, it could be thin or it could be, depending. So, I mean, that's just something I think we need to look at. If we have an issue, obviously it sounds like we have an issue that is based on people not being accountable for the job that we're hiring them to do, and it's critical. to produce timely data for decision-making, then I think we have something that we need to look into. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any more questions? No? Okay. Next, we have the internal audit report by Ms. Lenny Stewart. Good evening.
Good afternoon. Linda Stewart, City Auditor. Our office completed the Louisiana Legislative Auditor's agreed-upon procedures report, and this report is actually submitted as a part of the external audit reporting package. The Louisiana Legislative Auditor requires any public agency that receives $500,000 or more in public funds that they have to complete this report. One of the positive things for us is that the legislative auditor does allow internal audit departments to complete this report, and so that defrays the cost of the external audit because we do it. The procedures included in this report are intended to improve accountability and transparency, and over time, you'll cause savings as the potential for fraud, waste, and abuse is reduced. And again, this is for the year January 1st through December 1st, 2023. The procedures focus on 14 major high-risk categories as defined by the legislative auditors, and those categories are outlined by the bulleted list that you see on the screen, including that one at the bottom. Those 14 categories are then subdivided into 32 what we call control testing points. Those control testing points over the years that we've been doing this have been adjusted by the legislative auditor based on what they've learned from the governmental agencies and the reports that they get from the governmental agencies. One of the things that they have gotten more recently is they've gotten some complaints about kind of how much work goes into doing this and how much it's costing. So they made some adjustment in terms of incentivizing governmental agencies if they get their reports on time, that within a kind of 2-year span, those that don't have any exceptions in that second year, they won't have to audit those areas. So that may cut down on the test work. We won't get that advantage because we didn't get our audit in on time this particular time, but if they keep that in place, hopefully we will be able to take advantage of that. The areas that you see are kind of on the fringes of operation, not directly citizen-facing or customer-facing, but if not paid attention to, again, they could be susceptible to fraud, waste, and abuse, or receive negative publicity if not paid attention to. The first major category is written policies and procedures. This has improved over the time period that we've been doing this the last 6 or 7 years. There were several to start with, but now we're only down to 2 areas that needs addressing, improving, updating the disaster recovery and the business continuity policy, as well as documenting the usage of antivirus software. 2 small areas, but those areas do need to be addressed and cleaned up. The next issue deals with the board, which would be you, the council, receiving reports of the status of the audit findings that the auditors have gone over. This is a relatively new finding. It was implemented by the administration in October to December, but because y'all didn't get the reports the entire year, we had to note that as an exception. So going forward, this one probably should be falling off because they do have a procedure in place. Bank reconciliation, something else the external auditor has already talked about. For the procedures that we identified, generally we have to look at about 5 transactions, nothing very large, but for this particular one specifically, even though the bank reconciliation was prepared, the requirement is that the reconciliation has to be reviewed within a month's time, and that wasn't done for one of the 5 reconciliations that we reviewed. For collections, making sure those collections are accurate and properly deposited. In 2 instances of the 5 instances that we noted for collection points, 2 of those areas, the employees share the same cash register. And that would be an accountability problem if there was some issue in terms of the collections not being accurate. Also, one of the requirements if you have deposits that are over $100, those deposits have to be made within 1 business day. And for 2 of the 5 instances that we noted, there were several deposits that were over $100 that were not made within that 1 business day, and that was in Sportran, the transit area. For credit cards, debit cards, again, we looked at 5 transactions, 4 what we call travel cards and 1 fuel card. 2 of the travel cards did not have evidence of a supervisory review, and 1 of the travel cards did not state the business or public purpose of the transaction that we noted. The fuel card had no exceptions. Payroll and personnel, making sure that pay rates and paychecks that the employees get are accurate. We looked at 5 employees and their paychecks and noted that 1 employee's paycheck in comparison to their personnel file, their pay rate was slightly under by a few cents. But I guess the most significant thing that we did note, it kind of goes back to what we discussed with the external auditors. There was 1 person who had a termination payment within public safety. Their termination payment was not correct. It was 240 hours overpaid. We believe that the duplicate payment for that COVID-19 settlement was was paid inaccurately. But we've discussed that with management, and they are aware of the issue. For ethics, again, something that's repeated. 1 employee out of the 5 that we looked at did not have the 1 hour of ethics training. An additional issue that we identified as an exception, the notification of the updated ethics policy was not sent out to employees within the fiscal year. That's, again, a requirement within the legislative auditor procedures. And finally, sexual harassment. Again, a state law, this training has to be done by all employees at least once. And more recently, they've added that it has to be done within the fiscal year that the person was hired. We noted 2 employees that had not had the training over a year, but 1 employee more recently hired did not have the training within the fiscal year. As well, the sexual harassment report was not completed before February 1st, and that is a requirement within the law. Management response, they concurred with our exceptions noted and will work with the departments to address the deficiencies noted. Any questions?
Any questions? Councilman Brooks?
I have a question. Under collections, you said you found 2 employees shared what?
The same cash register,
Same cash register.
correct?
So should there be a shortage,
You would know, yeah, which employee may have made.
well, how did that, is that not normal? How did that happen?
It was in the police and SPAR, and I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if they don't have the equipment to do the cash registers, or I'm not quite sure.
We can find out for you.
I'm sorry?
Said we can find out for you.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's been a consistent problem in the police department. This is the first time we've identified it in
Where they
SPAR.
collect fines and whatnot, or
Yes.
ABO cards? Anywhere they handle cash, apparently.
It was in one area. I know it's the accident reports. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Talafaro?
Regarding credit cards, debit cards, fuel cards, what departments regarding fuel cards were audited? I mean, all the departments, or just obviously the departments that have a use for a fuel card?
Correct.
But is there any one specific department that we
The
focus on?
oversight of that is in the Public Works Department. Yeah, the Public Works Department.
So why is the sample so small,
The
realizing that
legislative
many?
auditor
I'm sorry.
outlines what we look at. They give specific instructions in the procedure. They just kind of want to get an idea of what's happening out there. And if there are issues, then you look at that and then you go and address that before it gets a lot bigger. So they just kind of look at everything at a high level. And if there are any issues, then, that gives you reason to go deeper.
So who in each department would be the gatekeeper for fuel cards?
There is an assigned, what do they call it, Tamika? Yeah, card administrator.
administrator?
Yeah. For
And
each
that card
department.
that card administrator provides you with the data of
They
the fuel card
provide the
usage?
Public Works Department with all of the data that they have for their department. And the Public Works Department kind of oversees and has oversight of that particular operation.
And does the marshal's office fall under that as well? All fuel cards? Or is that the marshal's office responsibility to manage their fuel cards? The marshal responsibility? Are they responsible to us for auditing?
Generally, no, the city marshal.
Do they provide their own data? They provide their own auditing?
Yes.
And
yes.
so where does their auditing go? I mean, in other words, if they get audited or another entity outside, who does that?
They have their own external auditor.
Okay.
And you may have to help me, but I believe they are a component unit, and their information gets included
Okay.
as a part of our audit.
Okay.
But they have their own individual
Got
audit.
it, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, appreciate it, thanks.
Okay. Ms. Stewart, can you give me an update on the water bill collections?
Yeah, we are currently reviewing that. We hope to have some type of draft report completed by the end of the month, and hope to have a final report by the end of the year.
Okay. Also in that report, I'd like to know the collection agency and maybe some data on if they are collecting, how much, what percentage. I want to make sure we don't push this back, because this was one part of the audit that I wanted.
Yeah, I think at this point, I can tell you that we are aware that there was no collection agency for most of the period that we've been looking at. I'm not aware that they've actually hired one at this point, but I know for the period that we've been looking at there was not a collection agency.
Okay, thank
They
you.
did whatever they did in-house.
Okay, any more questions?
Are we looking at collections of all water bills? That's what you're speaking of on the collection?
Yes.
Okay.
I know we had some issues there. That was one of the reasons why I called for the audit for the water billing collections. So I'm going to make sure that we get that and get an understanding to make sure we are collecting our water bills.
So we still don't have anything in place? Mr. Dart?
Marcus, what are you aware of? I know we had worked with a collection agency on some of the larger ones, and I know the in-house folks have been trying to collect essentially the small residential accounts. And we were talking just before lunch about trying to actually get an attorney involved to begin to look at some of the bigger ones, because it's really not a collection agency issue too much, as best I can tell. Marcus, you might want to.
That's largely correct. The in-house, the customer service department of water and sewer is handling a lot of the residential and commercial accounts. My office assigned out some of the multi-unit apartment complex water bills to delinquent recovery associates under an old collections contract that was pre-existing. And we've been in discussions about either sending more of the commercial accounts to a collections agency or sending them directly to an attorney who would do so on a contingency basis.
Any more questions? Okay. Councilman Jackson?
And I just want to specify, when we talk about collections, we're talking about accounts that have been discontinued. They're not still receiving water at this particular time, or we're talking about past due accounts, but their accounts are still active. I just want to make sure we get that clarification.
Probably a little of both, be my guess.
Yeah.
We'd like to get them while they're still using water, so we have some leverage over them.
Right.
Yeah, but as long as they're using water, that's not much leverage. Okay, thank you.
It's a lot harder to get them if they've learned to live without it, it's a lot harder to get them interested than if we at least have the threat of cutting it off. Marcus, you can, I don't want to play lawyer here, but at least this time.
That's correct.
Okay. I think my biggest concern are for the active accounts and the accounts that are not active. I want to make sure that all these big corporations are paying their water bills and residentials. I mean, that was one of the issues we had, and this is priority for me to make sure we are collecting our payments. It's a fund account that needs to be actually collected. I don't care who business it is, who home it is, we need to collect these water bills.
We agree.
Okay? Okay. Any more questions? Okay. If there is no other questions, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
What y'all gonna do for an hour and 10 minutes now?